Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Azerbaijan and Armenia have accused each other of violating a new ceasefire agreement in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Earlier, Russia and France said both sides should abide by the latest truce. Over 600 people have been killed since the fighting broke out on the 27th of September. An arms embargo imposed on Iran by the United Nations Security Council has expired today. In a statement, Iran's foreign ministry says all restrictions on transfer of arms have been terminated. Last month, the Security Council rejected a U.S. demand for an extension to the embargo. India has reported the world's highest COVID-19 deaths today as 1,033 people lost their lives overnight. The country's tally of infections is nearing 7.5 million as nearly 62,000 more people tested positive in a day. In Pakistan, 16 people have lost their lives to the virus, raising the death count to 6,654, while the global tally of coronavirus deaths has topped 1.1 million, with more than 39.5 million infections. These are the headlines. News in detail coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Azerbaijan and Armenia have accused each other of violating a new ceasefire agreement in the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. Earlier, Russia and France said they mediated the latest truce amid escalation in violence.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called his Armenian and Azeri counterparts in the hours before the ceasefire announcement. He urged both parties to adhere to the deal brokered in Moscow last week. Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron welcomed the ceasefire and stressed that it should be strictly respected by both parties. On Saturday, Azerbaijan accused Armenia of striking its second-largest city with a ballistic missile, which killed at least 13 civilians and wounded 50 others. Armenian Defense Ministry denied the claim and accused Baku of continuing to shell populated areas. In a tweet, the Turkic Council urged the Armenian forces to stop attacking civilians and to withdraw their occupying forces from Azerbaijani lands. Over 600 people have been killed since the fighting broke out on the 27th of September.
Meanwhile, an arms embargo imposed on Iran since 2007 by the United Nations Security Council has expired today. In a statement, Iran's foreign ministry says all restrictions on the transfer of weapons and financial services have ended. It said the dissolution of curbs requires no new resolution, nor does it require any statement or any other measure by the Security Council. But Iran said it was self-reliant in its defense and there was no need to go on a weapons buying spree. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif called it a momentous day for the world. He said Iran has protected the Security Council resolutions 231 and the 2015 nuclear deal despite U.S. efforts. Last month, a U.S. demand for an extension to the arms embargo was rejected by the Security Council. However, Washington unilaterally announced the restoration of all UN sanctions against Tehran. Now, the Taliban say they have discussed the ongoing process of intra-Afghan talks with the German representatives in Doha. Spokesperson Mohammed Naeem said Mullah Abdul Haq Vasik, head of the European division of Taliban, met Mark Potzel. He said the ambassador of Germany to Qatar was also present in the meeting. The Taliban say both sides expressed their optimism about the progress in intra-Afghan negotiations. They said the German representative appreciated the Taliban stance that a dialogue is needed for solving the Afghan issues. Meanwhile, the first Vice President of Afghanistan, Amrullah Saleh, has been given charge of Kabul's security. Moving on now, Turkey says the European Union will collapse if it fails to address the Eastern Mediterranean issue in a balanced manner. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said this while visiting a drilling vessel. Erdogan said the bloc has become captive to Greece and Cyprus in the maritime dispute. The president also announced the discovery of an additional 85 billion cubic meters of gas in the Black Sea. Erdogan said the reserves are the largest hydrocarbon resources ever discovered in the country. Relations between the bloc and Ankara remain tense due to maritime disputes in the Mediterranean. Now, tens of thousands of Israelis have again taken to the streets calling for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's resignation. The anger is growing against Netanyahu, who is on trial for bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Scores of demonstrations are held across the country, while organizers say about 260,000 people participated nationwide. The demonstrators say Netanyahu is unfit to rule amid corruption, indictment and for mishandling COVID-19 pandemic. Many of the protesters in Jerusalem include business owners, entrepreneurs and workers who lost their jobs. Israeli media reported several incidents of violence by far-right's counter-demonstrators. In the northern city of Haifa, police said they arrested 3 people. Now moving to Lebanon, where tens of thousands of people took to the streets in Beirut to mark the first anniversary of a protest movement. The demonstrators called for a complete overhaul of the political system and an improvement in basic services. This report has more details.
Anger is still there since mass protests swept the country late last year. The pandemic, economic crisis, and the aftermath of the August blast in Beirut overwhelmed the movement. While the turmoil led to the resignation of Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri, politicians have since failed to form a government. Protesters say they're not abandoning their demand for revolution and for President Michel Aoun to step aside. Hundreds marched past the central bank, target of their anger over a financial crisis that has seen the Lebanese pound lose nearly 80% of its value. As the monetary reserves run low, there are not enough resources to clean up the devastation left by the Beirut port blast. The United Nations says around 55% of the country's population lives below the poverty line. Those hit by joblessness, poverty, and hunger rely on relief agencies and NGOs with no way out of the crisis in sight.
Now, an international criminal court delegation has arrived in Sudan to discuss the prosecution of former President Omar al-Bashir. Bashir is wanted by the ICC on charges of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. In a statement, the Prime Minister's office said ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda and others will stay in Sudan until Wednesday. The statement read the delegation will discuss cooperation methods with the government of Sudan. It said the discussions will be regarding the suspects against whom ICC has issued arrest warrants. Bashir was toppled last year after mass protest, and he has been accused of masterminding atrocities to crush a revolt in Darfur in which around 300,000 people died. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, in the United States, women rallied across the country against President Donald Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett.
The participants said Barrett intends to restrict access to abortion and other civil liberties. They also chanted slogans against Trump. Events Executive Director Rachel O'Leary Carmona said Trump's presidency began with women marching and now it is going to end with women voting. Women gathered on Freedom Plaza in Washington for a midday rally. They later marched to the Supreme Court and ended the day with a text banking telethon. March organizers said the goal of telethon was to send 5 million text messages to encourage people to vote in the poll. This comes days before the country's presidential election on the 3rd of November.
Now, India has reported the world's highest COVID-19 deaths today as 1,033 people lost their lives overnight. The country's tally of infections is nearing 7.5 million as some 62,000 tested positive in the last day. The global tally of coronavirus deaths has topped 1.1 million with more than 39.5 million infections. More details in this report.
The second wave of COVID-19 is breaking grim records set by the first, forcing fresh lockdowns and travel restrictions across the world. On average, the virus is now infecting over 400,000 people around the world every day. In the US, states have rolled back plans of opening up economies and completely lifting restrictions. But at one of his rallies, President Donald Trump proposed locking all of those not in favor of lifting the curbs.
You got to get your governor to open up your state, okay? And get your schools open. Get your schools open. The schools have to be open, right? Lock them all up.
With local infections surging across Europe, France, UK, Italy, Cyprus and Spain are now grappling with an aggressive outbreak. But Australia has now started lifting major restrictions.
From 11:59 p.m. tonight, the following changes to restrictions will be made. There will be no time limit on leaving your home for exercise or for socialising. The travel distance from your home will move from 5 kilometres to 25 kilometres. Outdoor gatherings will increase to 10 people from 2 households.
In Asia, Indonesia and Thailand are also struggling to contain the transmission. Meanwhile, China seems to have dodged the threat of another outbreak after mass testing in Qingdao.
Well, in Pakistan, 16 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 during the last 24 hours, raising the death toll 6,654. The Health Ministry said 567 people tested positive overnight. The ministry added there are 9,009 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 323,000 countrywide cases, more than 307,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 140,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 101,000 cases. In the capital, Islamabad, nearly 18,000 have been infected so far. Now in Pakistan, 10 people have died in an accident on the Gilgit-Skardu highway. The passenger bus plunged into a ravine after a landslide near Tangaspari. The bus was carrying 15 passengers from Rawalpindi to Skardu. The authorities say the injured have been shifted to the hospitals. They say some people are in critical condition and fear more casualties. Now in Vietnam, 22 soldiers have gone missing after a landslide in the country's central Quang Tri province. This can be the largest military loss in peacetime as the country battles the worst flooding in years. In a statement, the government said the landslide struck a unit of Vietnam's 4th military region. It said bodies of 3 of the missing soldiers have been recovered. The water at rivers in Quang Tri province has been risen to highest levels in over 20 years. Intense rains have caused floods and mudslides, killing at least 64 people in the country so far. Vietnam's weather agency says rain of as much as 600 millimeters is likely to continue in parts of the country. Now, more than a dozen pilot whales have died in New Zealand after beaching on the country's North Island. Department of Conservation said a pod of about 40 to 50 whales got stranded in the Coromandel Peninsula. It said rescuers and volunteers worked all day to refloat about 25 of the animals. The department said a high tide at night allowed stranded whales to float back into the deep waters, but despite efforts, many dead pilot whales were discovered at the site. Now, the elusive British street artist Banksy says a new artwork depicting a girl using a tire as a hula hoop is his latest creation. The work appeared on Tuesday on the red brick wall of the beauty salon in Nottingham, England. Banksy posted a picture of the work in the student area of the city on his Instagram feed and website. Banksy is known for witty artworks that often make powerful references to world affairs. His works this year have alluded to the coronavirus crisis and the Black Lives Matter movement. In August, he funded a boat crewed by volunteers to rescue refugees in the Mediterranean. In China now, the Shanghai Spring and Summer 2021 Fashion Week is presenting the city's fashionistas. The fashion show highlights Chinese original elements in the new designs debuted this season.
One of the designers featured classic Chinese mythical figure Fu, known for his fearless efforts to catch the sun. Another renowned clothing firm, Hemu's new designs were also inspired by one of the oldest Chinese classics of mountains and rivers. In recent years, Chinese consumers have preferred domestically produced and original designs.
Chinese consumers used to prefer some Western brands to domestic ones. But in recent years, this trend has been reversed. With more and more excellent original Chinese designers emerging, Chinese consumers are more and more likely to foot the bill for some domestic vanguard designers. Although the current market mainly features designers of the first and second tier cities, the designers of the second and third tier cities are coming strong, and that is where we will focus our efforts to develop.
The Chinese clothing industry also expects to draw international customers by showing off indigenous designs at the gala. The fashion show will also organize nearly 100 online shows.
Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow is ready for coordination with Saudi Arabia to support stability in energy markets. The Russian leader held a telephonic conversation with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In a statement, the Kremlin said the two leaders discussed the implementation of agreements by the OPEC+. It said both sides are deliberated on further cooperation in combating the spread of the novel coronavirus. The Kremlin said Putin and Prince Salman talked about prospects of using the Russian vaccine Sputnik V in Saudi Arabia. Venezuela sits on some of the world's largest crude reserves, yet faces regular gasoline shortages. Years of underinvestment and U.S. sanctions have resulted in a swift fall in production with the OPEC nation. This report has the details.
The fall in Venezuela's oil exports has starved President Nicolas Maduro's government of its main source of revenue. The drop has contributed to an economic collapse and left authorities short of cash for essential imports such as food and medicine. Venezuela's National Assembly legislator has pointed out several reasons for the worsening economic situation in the country.
The
explanation for this decrease is basically the fall in the production of crude, disinvestment, lack of maintenance, loss of human capital, corruption, and of course the isolation that Venezuela is going through. Which means that at this time, no large petroleum corporation wants to invest in Venezuela, much less sell its crude. That's basically the explanation of the current situation in Venezuela. Since the gas field have been shut for so long, they may require even larger investment than were previously estimated.
In June, Venezuela's oil exports slumped to their lowest level since 1943. A half a dozen tankers, looking to avoid the threat of U.S. sanctions, sailed away from Venezuelan waters without loading. Not just them, tighter U.S. curbs have scared away many other customers of the state-run oil firm and some shipping firms. President Maduro recently shared the numbers for the first time in public.
Between 2014 and 2019, Venezuela experienced the sharpest fall in the internal revenue in its history. This is perhaps the first time I'm referring to these numbers in public. In 6 years, we lost 99% of the volume of currency income. Saying it another way, for every $100 or euros the country received through the sale of the petroleum in 2014, today we received less than one.
Together with unreliable water, power and cooking gas supplies, the shortages have prompted a new wave of protests in Venezuela.
With that, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.